Welcome to episode 2.
We've got news from Arizona, Omaha, Denmark, and Nashville.
There's the second half of Tom Schreve's interview from Roaring Camp.
And you can buy the biggest estate railroad in the country.
This is Railroad Showcase. Before we get started, we'd like to thank everyone for all of your positive feedback, the likes, the comments. It's really appreciated. We heard from people all over. Devin from California said, "It was way cool." Phaedra from Anderson, California said, "So happy to see this. I'm a fan."
Danny from Utah said, "This is better than GSQ. It's alive. Graham and Greg, great show."
And Al from Sacramento says, "Bravo, G and GR. I love the background set." And the last one was a comment from our friend Malin from up in the mountains. He says, "Starting to look a little silvery around the edges, Greg." Okay, thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Let's do the news. Amtrak has placed an order for 75 Siemens Charger Series diesels. The price tag will be $11 million per unit for a total of $850 million. These AC units will be used to replace aging P40 and P42 engines on long-distance routes. They will meet Tier 4 emissions requirements and are expected to consume 10% less fuel in the process. They'll be built in the Siemens facility south of Sacramento, California. The first units should be delivered in 2021, and the last units should be delivered by 2024.
On January the 2nd, a passenger train traveling between the two Denmark islands, Funen and Zealand, struck fallen cargo from a freight train traveling in the opposite direction. The Washington Post reported that 6 people perished and 16 others were injured. This was the worst train accident in Denmark in over 30 years. There is some speculation that high winds may have contributed to the fallen cargo. However, the technical chief and oversight of the bridge told CNN that the wind conditions at the time of the accident were below the level at which the freight train would have been required to slow down or to stop running.
The Silver Horizon Vistadome was moved on January 10th. It has served as an Amtrak station building in Maricopa, Arizona for more than 15 years. A couple years ago, the county sold the car to the Maricopa Historical Society for $1. A highway overpass project has prompted this move to a piece of property that is planned to be a new city park. The Silver Horizon was built by Bud in the late 40s for CB&Q as a sleeper observation on the California Zephyr. It was seen in the movies A League of Their Own and Pearl Harbor. Hopefully, the Silver Horizon will receive some TLC, but unfortunately, it's no longer going to be sitting on live rail. In an even bigger move, Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis engine number 576 got airborne last week. This engine has been on static display for 75 years. The nonprofit Nashville Steam Preservation Society has raised $500,000 for their first phase of the restoration process. The engine is being moved from a city park to the Tennessee Central Railway Museum. Let's hear from volunteer Rebecca Bender, who spoke with us less than 48 hours before the scheduled move.
Hey guys, this is Rebecca with Nashville Steam. Greetings from chilly and not so sunny Nashville. Just wanted to give you an update on the move. As you can see, we've got the engine all tied down, ready to go on the trailers for Sunday morning. The trucks have already been delivered and set up at the drop-off point. We're still waiting on our trailer that we're going to haul the tender with. So that's just kind of hanging out on some jacks ready to go. Hopefully we'll get that done tomorrow. And then by Sunday morning, we are going to be set up, ready to go, rolling out of the park, taking it down Charlotte Avenue, and we're going to bring a piece of Nashville history back to life. It's going to be exciting. Please be a part of it. Go to nashvillesteam.org and donate. Also check us out, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram to keep track of all our progress. Thanks again, guys, from Railroad Showcase. Hope to see you soon.
This 300-ton 484 is a 1942 Alco engine, and we are really looking forward to seeing their progress on its restoration.
Big things happened for Union Pacific this week. In an effort to give their newly implemented Unified Plan 2020 a strong start, they announced on Monday the 7th the appointment of Jim Vena as UP's new Chief Operating Officer, effective January 14th. Vena has 40 years of experience with the railroad, starting his career as a brakeman on the Canadian National and, having moved up to become the company's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, retired in 2016. Under his oversight, the railroad gained the best operating ratio in the North American industry, as well as achieving the company's best safety incident ratio in its history. This announcement was apparently met with high expectations from investors, as UP's stock value jumped almost 9% over the following 48 hours, adding around $9 billion to the company's market value.
Union Pacific is up 8% today. You've been on that all day.
Yeah, so that's pretty much a one-man story. It's a key man. Jim Vena comes on out of retirement, former longtime high-ranking positions within Canadian National Railways, and he's shown that he has the ability to reduce operating ratios for railway companies. Obviously a disciple of Hunter Harrison, a railway legend in his own right, and I think that if you're the biggest company, you're driving the most revenue in that industry, and you bring the operating expenses down, that's going to bring the stock up, and that's what people are betting on. That's why it's up nearly 9% today.
Wow, that's big news.
Yeah.
Now, Vena worked under Hunter Harrison, didn't he?
Yeah. So Jim worked for Canadian National for 40 years and slowly worked his way up through management around the same time that Hunter Harrison was really implementing the precision scheduling, which isn't a new thing. He didn't invent it, but he's generally considered to be the first one to really implement it in a strong way, and some people say that it had a lot of success under his direction.
Well, I mean, obviously it's not popular with a lot of people and dismissed by a lot of people, but clearly Wall Street gives it a very strong vote of confidence, and they're voting with their dollars. I mean, to the tune of $9 billion. Yeah. One of the things that impressed me about his history is that he isn't just a 90-day wonder. I mean, maybe not everyone is a fan of him, but he came up through the ranks. He started as a teenager.
18.
He started as a brakeman at 18 and was an engineer, a train master, and many other positions, working his way up through the railroad. He is a college grad, but he understands how the railroad works from the inside.
Absolutely.
So, well, and frankly, that's something we can relate to too. I mean, moving the stock market around, I'm certain that the Dow Jones Transportation Index probably jumped by $3 or $4 billion when the Railroad Showcase launch was announced last week.
Yes, that was absolutely what happened.
What's it like to work for 45 years for a steam railroad in the late 20th and early 21st centuries? What would it be like to learn about railroading from steam engineers who worked on Class I railroads and others who worked on logging lines?
Here's the second half of the interview with Tom Schreve from Roaring Camp.
I started working for Roaring Camp in 1972 as a food service person. I went in and on my own time, I trained to fire the locomotive, at which point I became a fireman and have been on the engines and in engine service ever since. I got my promotion in 1976. To engineer, and I am the longest employee on property at the present time. Roaring camp is very much like these old logging operations wherein the engineer also did all the mechanicals on the engine. One of the gentlemen who taught me a lot of things here was a man by the name of Ed Paulson. And Mr. Paulson was a steam engineer and mechanic for Santa Cruz Lumber on their operation up above Waterman Gap. They had one locomotive, and on those days when he wasn't running the engine, he was working on the engine. Ed could look at a nut that you would hand him that was found along the railroad and know exactly where it went on the locomotive. You know, he could do that, and I'm getting close, but I'm not quite there yet. Ed had started out working for the Northwestern Pacific when it was still the San Francisco and Northwestern in 1907. He worked down in Tiburon shops for a little while. Then he got a permanent gig as the switch engine engineer up in Eureka. When Santa Cruz Lumber was looking for a locomotive, they came up to Scotia and happened to bump into Ed, and they looked around, and they were going to buy one of the Climaxes that Scotia had up there, which was for sale. And Ed turned to him and said, "You don't want that damn thing. You want a Shay." So they found a Shay, and they grabbed Ed and they put him to work at Santa Cruz Lumber. And from what I understand, he was the only engineer that ever ran that engine up there in Waterman Gap. That engine's kind of famous, actually. It was the engine that they had to fly in on a skyline in order to get it into Waterman Gap. I learned a lot from the old-timers who were here, the old mechanics, the machinists, the engineers who came in off the Southern Pacific who operated here, Charlie Hoiel, Neil Vodden, Gene Oleg. They taught me a lot. And I learned a lot from other people too. I found that you can learn something from anybody who comes along, even guys you hate, you know, even guys who don't really know a whole lot of what's going on in one place. They might have knowledge in another spot, and so it's always a good idea to listen to people to see what's going on. What's an off season? Hey, Stephen, what's an off season? Oh, okay. We operate daily. We have something going up the hill every day of the year except for Christmas. We might be just the small diesel and a couple of cars, but we do have something going out every day. And we try to have one of the engines down with major service during the winter months. This year it was the number 2. We try to keep the other 2 engines in as good a mechanical condition as we possibly can. That being said, this is also the nastiest and hardest railroad in the United States. Our curves, some of the curves on the mountain are as tight as 75 feet. The ruling grade on the main line is 8.5%, and there may be a little bit of 9 on the switchback. We're also built on a lovely piece of property which has beautiful redwood trees and beautiful scenery all around it. Unfortunately, the mountain is also made out of sand, and it's got an earthquake fault running right through the middle of the property. That means you're always doing something. Plus the fact that while in many places you've got nice dry conditions and wood stays around forever and ever, here at Roaring Camp, the bugs which eat wood around here try to eat redwood. If they get a hold of something which is less than redwood, they love it. It's delicious. And they will eat anything. We're constantly replacing ties. We're constantly replacing rail, re-angling the railroad. The railroad sinks in places and gets bumps in places, and we have to take all of that out too. The steeper the grade, the more wear and tear you're going to have. You're forcing the equipment up a grade which not many outfits ever ran. It is not the easiest railroad in the United States to work on. All of this equipment has to stay operational because of the number of trains we operate every year. And we're always trying to keep ahead of the game as much as we can. I've got a good crew of guys. There are a number of young men who are coming in who are learning like I did on the job. Running a steam locomotive is not something you can learn in a book.
I'm gonna be a real something. I'm gonna be somebody. I'm gonna be a real gone cat. Then I won't want you. Everything's gonna roll my way. I'm gonna be nobody. I'm gonna.
So one of the things I appreciate about Roaring Camp is that it's a continuum. It's a place where steam knowledge is living on. Because let's face it, someone who is learning steam who's now in their 20s and 30s is not going to be learning it directly from the men who were running steam back in the 40s and 50s.
Unfortunately.
The gap is too large. And so men like Tom are the ones who are carrying that knowledge from those who did it in industrial practice and down through the preservation movement today. And, he's teaching young guys how to do steam.
Absolutely. And it's so nice to see that they have such a nice group of the young men there that are willing to learn. And that, like you said, he learned directly at the feet of those guys who worked on those engines, who transferred to that railroad. And he soaked that up, and he's just given it right back to the next generation. The product of the week this week is The Favorite.
This DVD normally sells for about $30. It is 40% off, which is $17.95. But it's also absolutely free shipping in the US, so that means you're getting it for almost 50% off.
It's like the opening scene of a great film when you walk up to the main gate at Disneyland and there's the station, and while you're standing there going through the turnstile, all of a sudden here comes the train into view, pulling into the station, and it's been a favorite memory all those years.
Well, I started with Walt Disney in 1954. Interestingly enough, the Combine car that we're celebrating here today was part of the original passenger car consist. Now remember, these are historic vehicles. I was at Walt Disney Studios in 1954 when those vehicles were being built. So it's a thrill to be here today, actually ride the Combine car as part of that original train set, having seen them built, knowing the lives that they've had, and these lives have now been rejoined up here today on this really, really special event.
When Walt designed and built Disneyland, he wanted to have an authentic railroad, so he had a passenger train and a freight train. And this particular car was said to be his favorite car because when he was a boy, he had actually worked on the railroad. He sold candy and newspapers, and he would have stored his supply in a combination car like this. This car is half passenger, half baggage. And so this would have been the car he would have rode in with the crew, talked to the crew. I've heard stories that he was even allowed to go up into the engine with the engineers and operate the equipment. And so this was Walt's favorite car. It's one of those unique artifacts that Walt actually touched. He would have walked through here. He approved the design of the stencils. I'm sure the paint scheme, everything was, in those days, was approved by Walt. And so this car is what Walt wanted.
As when I was a 12-year-old at Walt's knee, learning about trains from Walt, and my father, who was the first Disney Imagineer, Roger Brogy, I was at the park a month before it opened, and Walt took me on a ride in his cab around the park. And then on opening day, I got to ride in the Combine car, the opening day at Disneyland, July 17th, 1955, and I had turned 13. So I have not ridden in the Combine car since that day. So today closed that loop. So it's like revisiting your own childhood. But the beauty of it is, with railroading, your childhood continues for a lifetime.
Experience this historic occasion for yourself. Hear the stories, learn the history, ride in the cab, and ride in the Combine itself. All right, I got a couple of things. What did you find this week?
So the first item that I found is an article about video games.
What do you mean video games? This is a train show.
Hold on. So this article goes along with a core belief that I have, and I'm sure many people share, is that everything is better with trains. And video games are no exception. This article goes into some of the reasons why trains add not only new, different, and sometimes unexpected level elements to the usually static stages in a video game, but they also can allow for some pretty interesting world-building opportunities. It allows you to travel. They can take you places that you wouldn't normally be able to go, all while having gameplay on a train experience that can be really unique in and of itself, all the while showing you the passing landscapes that, again, can be very diverse and changing in a way that you wouldn't be able to get without it.
This one holds.
Wow, I hope I never find myself in an experience like that in a train.
Me neither.
But, you know, I used to play video games years ago. I don't too much anymore, but I was wondering if you thought that for the millennial generation, if this might be a way that trains actually stay in the social consciousness of young people.
Yeah, I don't know if this video game will ever encourage anybody to become diehard rail fans, but any exposure to trains and that sort of media is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I kind of think so. It's because in daily life, people don't come into contact with trains the way they used to. They don't ride them every day or every week, and this is one more exposure to trains. The first thing that I found was a really cool photograph from the archive of the Monterey County Public Library. The picture was taken in 1930, right around the start of the Depression. This is what they called a coach colony. It was in Gonzales, California, which is on SP's Coast Division, just below Salinas. So at the time this picture was taken, these coaches were probably 40 years old, maybe even older. What an interesting reuse of worn-out railroad equipment.
Indeed. Okay, so this next image is one that I found recently, and I know everybody's seen it. It's been on the internet for years, but we did a little bit of digging, and we found the story behind it. So first off, No one died. There were 2 crew members that were injured, but no one was in the building, so no fatalities occurred. So this is a Spino rail grinder, and I'm a little bit unfamiliar with the area, and the track there comes to a dead end at the end of this wharf. And just beyond that end of track was this boat shop. And they didn't realize that was the end of track, plowed right through the end of it, and went a little over 200 feet before they...
So you're saying that tank truck right there started out
on the other side of
the other side of the building, and the rail grinder train pushed the truck and itself clean through the building.
Clean through. It's almost a perfectly straight line.
Wow, that is an unforgettable image.
We actually found the location in Stavern where that happened. We have that link down in the show notes in the description, and you can go and see. And you can see that they actually haven't rebuilt the shop yet. You can see where the end of track is, where the building foundation still is, but there's nothing there.
I was also impressed by how you can see in that photograph that when they came to end of track, they blew through and ripped up all of the asphalt there on their way to the building.
Mm-hmm.
The largest 15-inch gauge railroad in North America is up for sale. This is John Wood's estate in Steelville, Missouri. There's a number of houses, a 3-story station, a huge roundhouse, and 5 miles of track running through the rolling woods on the property. Some of the equipment came from Glen Bell's Bell Gardens Railroad. Their diesel switcher and many of the riding cars were built brand new by Hillcrest Shops, and the crown jewel of the railroad is the 1/3 scale Northern built by Darrell Klumpmaker of Little America in Wisconsin.
Didn't you know John Woods?
I did. He was a subscriber to the Grand Scales Quarterly, and then I met him in person for the first time when he came to the Grand Scales convention that we had a number of years ago at Little America there in Wisconsin. And then he also came with us on one of our tours to England. And he told me that he was inspired by the Romney Hythe and Dim Church and the Raven Glass in Eskdale. It influenced him on what he was hoping to accomplish, and he accomplished it. It's astonishing to think 5 miles of track on a private 15-inch gauge railroad. It's an amazing feat, and riding around that railroad is awe-inspiring. I really hope that they find a buyer that will love the railroad and that will keep it open to all of those people who have spent years helping him build it and keeping it running.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to the second episode of Railroad Showcase. As always, hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube and head over to Facebook. We have a new group, Railroad Showcase RPO. You should check it out.
And please leave some comments for us wherever you are watching. We want to know what you liked the most so we can keep finding more of it. Until next time, keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.